Join the conversation.
Join the conversation.
You're with Cape Talk.
It's 9:32, time for The Naked Scientist. Dr. Chris Smith, consultant virologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital, Cambridge, joins us. A half an hour of answering your questions, and I see they've come through. Keep them coming through. Welcome, Chris. Great to have you back.
Morning, Clarence. Just had a really interesting interview I've been putting together for this week's Naked Scientist podcast, actually. And it's some of those bits of science that make you just go, wow, that's really impressive. This is Chi Zhou, who's a researcher at Edinburgh Medical School. And he said to me he's taking algae, which are the things that make your swimming pool go green, little tiny microscopic marine plants. And he basically covers them in a coating to make them magnetic, and then another coating to turn them into a drug capsule. And you might say, well, why on earth do you want to do that? Well, the shape of the algal cells is perfect for making them into a miniature drug basket. And you can put drugs into them and then use the fact they're magnetic to drive them around various parts of the body. And in this case, they're interested in bladder cancer because you want to deliver cancer drugs just to the cancerous cells and nowhere else. So you can see where the cancer is. You use a magnetic field to drive a fleet or a flotilla of these algae microbots to the cancer site. And because they're magnetic, you can then change the applied magnetic field and make them whiz up like a whirligig. And this makes them spit out the drug molecules just onto the tissue. And so you get localized delivery of the drug up to 10 times the concentration compared to other bits of the bladder. So you can focus your therapy. And isn't that amazing? If you want to hear the full interview, I'll put it out later today on The Naked Scientist. I just listened to that. It's just amazing what technologists, biotechnologists and scientists are doing these days.
That is fascinating. Okay, let's go on to our first question. If a helium balloon is floating inside a moving car, why does it fly forward when you hit the brakes?
Yeah, it sounds totally counterintuitive, doesn't it? And you can do this experiment yourself. Don't do it on the public road, please. It's dangerous. It might put you off. But do it in your driveway or do it on an abandoned airfield or a track where there are no other cars. Have a helium balloon in the back of the car, and as you pull away nice and fast, as you put your foot down and pull away from a standstill, the balloon, you'd think, would go to the back of the car. But it will actually come forward and hit the windscreen in front of you. And people think, that's a bit weird. And then when you jam the brakes on, the balloon doesn't actually hit the steering wheel like your head will. It actually will go to the back of the car and hit the rear windshield. So why is this? Well, the reason is it's floating. And that's why we like helium balloons, because they are less dense than the air around the balloon, so they're pushing out of the way more air than the mass of the balloon plus the helium, so they're buoyant, they're floating, and because they're less dense, they are pushed along by the air. So as you pull the car away, the reason the helium balloon comes to the windscreen rather than being left in the back of the car is because the air is heavier than the helium balloon and is left behind or goes towards the back of the car, and the helium balloon just floats forward on that air. So that's why it seems to do this paradoxical movement of moving to the front of the car as you pull away and moving to the back of the car when you put the brakes on.
There we go. Ivan says, morning, anything that burns, becomes ash. But why does the sun never burn out to ashes?
Well, it sort of does in some respects. The sun's a giant nuclear reactor. And what's happening in the sun, when it first formed, it was almost purely hydrogen. It's about 4.5 billion years old now, so there are a few other things in there. But when the sun first ignited as a star, it's fusing hydrogen atoms together. In fact, you take 4 atoms of hydrogen, squeeze them together, and they fuse to make an atom of helium, which is the next element in the periodic table. So it's not burning like a fire that leaves a residue. It's burning as a fusion reactor by making small elements join together and make bigger ones. Once it starts to get hotter and run out of so much hydrogen, it will move along the periodic table and start to fuse bigger elements together. And so instead of just joining hydrogen atoms, you will join bigger atoms together to make even bigger atoms. So in some respects, it is leaving ash because it's leaving a residue of bigger and bigger elements. And the stuff that we're made of, the carbon in our bodies, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the phosphorus, the sulfur that's essential for our bodies to work, those elements all come from stars. Stars that have blown themselves to pieces back in history and spewed their contents all over the universe. And some of it coalesced here and got into us. So effectively, we're all made of star ash, because the debris, when stars do burn themselves out and blow themselves up, are these heavier elements. And the bigger the star, the bigger and more complicated the elements it can make are, especially when it blows itself to pieces in a supernova. So they do in some respects make ash, but not in the form that we would recognise like the one in our fireplace.
Zuki in Bloberg, welcome. Go ahead for Dr. Chris Smith.
I just heard 7:02, but can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hey, hi, Clarence. Hi, Dr. Chris. So last week, Dr. Chris, you spoke about the cholesterol and the effects that bile have on cholesterol. So the question is, what effects are there, if any, on having your gallbladder removed? So what immediate effects are there on cholesterol in the near future and as we get older?
Hi, Zuki. The gallbladder doesn't make bile, it stores it. It's a pouch that sits just under your liver, and there are two bile ducts, the right and the left one, which unite and drain into the gallbladder, which then also sends a duct down to the pancreas, and the pancreas then adds to the bile pancreatic digestive juices, and this all comes out into the small intestine in response to the stimulus of eating. So the gallbladder is a convenient repository for bile, which allows you to store extra bile between meals. And then the gallbladder contracts because it's a muscular bag, and that squirts the bile out when you need it in response to the same signals that make the pancreas produce pancreatic juices. If you remove the gallbladder, although there's a slightly lower capacity for bile, you will still have enough bile because you're also using the bile ducts and the pancreatic ducts as effectively a storage vehicle as well. So you'll still be able to make enough bile to emulsify the fats in the diet, and therefore you won't see a demonstrable difference in cholesterol level. If you eat lots of saturated fat, you're still going to put your cholesterol level up because you will have more fat coming in, and you'll still have enough bile there to absorb it, and that will affect your cholesterol level.
And Poloso in Centurion, welcome.
Thank you for taking my call. Great show as always. Dr. Chris, I came across a picture of a handball on the internet with a densely woven spider web stretched across the horns and extending down to the face and nose. So, and apparently there were live spiders inside the web. And then yet the oryx seemed completely unbothered. And then apparently this was observed over a couple of days. Could this be a symbiotic relationship between the spiders and the antelope, or is this parasitic behavior?
Really interesting point. I've not actually thought about this or come across this, but we know that many animals team up, and animals you wouldn't expect normally to form relationships do form relationships which are mutually beneficial, which is where you're saying this idea of symbiosis comes in. For instance, there are some enormous fish that fall victim to parasites, and wrasse are a good example of this, and they swim through cleaner stations where a cadre of smaller fish come along and peck off the parasites because they have nutritional value, and the smaller fish can get at where these are sticking on the bigger fish, and they eat the parasites. They could also eat some of the gel that the fish secretes onto its scales and even pull off some scales. The cleaner fish know that if they do that, they're likely to be attacked by the big fish. So they minimise how much damage they do, and they maximise how many parasites they get as a free meal, and they're also benefiting from the protection of hanging around with a huge great fish that will put off other predators that might eat the small fish. So this sort of relationship comes up quite a lot in nature. I haven't heard or seen anybody document an idea of a spider web forming between the horns of an antelope and potentially therefore keeping the flies down. But it's a really cool idea. I don't know if anyone's looked at that. It may well be this is commonplace, and biologists who look at this kind of thing will say, oh, this is well known. Let me go and have a look and see if this is a thing, or whether you've discovered a potential symbiotic relationship, because it's a great idea, isn't it? The flies fly into the spider web, spider's happy because it's got food on tap and some protection, Antelope happy, fewer flies to bother its eyes.
Al, question via WhatsApp. I would like to ask Dr. Chris, how does cloud seeding impact regional water cycles? Everyone keeps blaming global warming, but I'd argue seeding to be a greater threat as it seems to have the potential to disrupt adjacent regional rainfall.
This is very controversial. You might remember a few years ago, Dubai Airport was flooded out abruptly by a very dramatic rainstorm, and literally meters of water fell. And this was blamed on recent local cloud seeding activity. What do we mean by that? Well, it is possible to provoke rainfall by forcing clouds to form in certain places, and you can do that by basically injecting into the right level of the atmosphere small particles that are hygroscopic or deliquescent even. In other words, stuff that will form a fine dust and give lots of surface area for water to collect around. Water likes to collect on surfaces, and if you have lots of small particles, water molecules, which are in the vapour phase in the air, can stick onto those surfaces and then stick together as liquid droplets. And once they become sufficiently big, gravity wins and they fall out of the sky as rain. And this has been done for donkey's years. People know we can do this. The Chinese ostensibly and allegedly did this before the Beijing Olympics to try to make sure they got good weather for the Beijing Olympics, because they did this upwind of Beijing and up weather. If you know which is the direction of the prevailing weather systems, you can do this. And if you force the atmosphere to lose its water upwind of a territory, there's going to be drier air downwind, and therefore rainfall will be impacted. So there will be local and beyond local impacts. And people have even looked at the effects of airports, because airports also, and aircraft, also force the weather. As the aircraft take off, they create vortices around the wings, which are zones of low pressure. This causes areas of low pressure where water to coalesce and fall out of the sky in these low pressure areas, effectively robbing places downwind of the airport of some of their rainfall. Does this make a demonstrable difference to bigger geographies and to world water and weather patterns? I think the jury's out at the moment. People are looking at this, but I don't think there's compelling evidence that this, if I make it rain here, make, in the grand scheme of things, a demonstrable difference to the people downwind of me. I don't know. I don't think so, but don't take that as read. I'll check and see if there's any evidence of greater effects in that respect.
Then we get a Francois. Remind your questions via WhatsApp on 072-567-1567. You can call and put your questions directly to the Naked Scientist via the following number, 021-446-0567. Good morning, Clarence, Dr. Smith. The question, what causes restless legs and how to prevent it? Thank you, Francois.
Hello, Francois. It's quite common enough that people bring up this programme to ask about it. It's not something trivial, and people who are affected by this find it really very destructive to their ability to sleep and rest and feel relaxed. It is where you feel compelled to move your legs around, and usually it happens when you're tired and you just can't stop fidgeting, and it keeps you awake. So paradoxically, you're trying to get to sleep and you're feeling really tired and it keeps you awake. We don't know exactly why this happens, but it seems to be a neurological phenomenon, and certain families complain of this, and there are certain things that make it worse, some drugs that are stimulant and so on that make it worse. There are some treatments that you can take which will actually help to damp it down. There are things that you can take, certain drugs and treatments, psychoactive substances, that will reduce activity in the nervous system and make it better. But don't suffer in silence, because if this happens to you, then seek some help, because there are various things. You start with the simple things and then build up that can help to reduce the impact of this, and therefore help to get you a better night's sleep.
And then we got a voice note in from Kevin. Let's go to Kevin.
Good morning. Question for Dr. Chris. What happens during the process when sperm forms gelatin material, like it would be like tapioca pells? What happens during that process? Some would say that is because of the sperm being stored for a long time and not being released. Is that true? And what causes it?
Sperm are made in the testes. Those are the balls. And there are stem cells there, which are in tubules. The testis has a whole load of tubes and pipes, which are lined by stem cells, which are the cells that produce the sperm cells. The sperm are then moved out of the testis up to the seminal vesicles, where they are stored until they're needed. And they are nourished by secretions from that glandular tissue, but also from the prostate gland. And then when ejaculation happens, a sequence of nerve impulses come from the autonomic nervous system that causes what we call a myoepithelium, a muscular lining, to contract and squeeze in the same way that your gut contracts and squeezes, in some respects your stomach and your bladder, to push things along tubes. So it causes waves of peristalsis or pressure movements, which pushes the sperm out and then out of the body. And it is, as I say, supplemented by secretions from the prostate gland and also the tubes that it's in. And the composition will be affected by how many sperm cells are there and the ratio of how much sperm is there to how much of this prostatic fluid is there. The prostatic fluid is there to provide a stable chemical environment and also some nutrition to the sperm, because they're living cells, they're very energetic, they have to swim, they need a lot of energy, so there are sugars there as well. Some people say that in each ejaculate there's the equivalent of 5 calories worth of energy in each ejaculate. But if you've had sex more frequently or more recently, there will be fewer sperm because it takes time to make them. Your testes make about 5,000 sperm a second, and the average ejaculate may contain 15-20 million sperm. But if you've recently used up your supply, it takes time to replenish it. But you'll still have the secretions from the glandular tissue, which the prostate, which is easier to make and can be produced in greater volume sooner. So therefore, it might look more liquidy or runny when there's fewer solid bits like sperms in it, and thicker when there are more sperms. And that would, as I say, depend upon how often a person or an animal has had sex.
Another question in about sperm, but let's go to Ernest first. Ernest, welcome. Go ahead for the Naked Scientist.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Chris. I saw Brian Cox the other evening describing his favorite little piece of the sky. And he was saying, in this little piece of the sky, there were multi-thousands or millions of galaxies. And I thought to myself, what holds it all together? It's, I think of a jar of jam. There's the glass holding it. What holds all this together? Does it go on forever? Is it to infinity? It's mind-boggling to me. Are we in a locker somewhere? That's my thing.
Yeah, well, they are mind-boggling questions because we just have not evolved a brain really capable of comprehending the scale of the universe. Because in our galaxy, the Milky Way, there are a couple of 100 billion stars in our galaxy, which is about 100,000 light years across. But there are a couple of 100 billion galaxies like ours and others. So there are at least, if you think with 100 billion, that's 10 to the 11, and there are 100 billion of those. That's 10 to the 11 times 10 to the 11, so that's 10 to the 22 stars out there just in the night sky. And the universe started as a tiny point presence and has been growing ever since. And the thing that holds it together is gravity pulling it together. But gravity is a relatively weak force. And the thing that's pushing it all apart is dark energy, which is making the universe at the moment expand. So what you've got is a combination of the two. The galaxies have at their centres supermassive black holes, which are gravitationally active, and they're hanging on to their cadre of stars. There are 200 billion stars in each of those galaxies. Each of the galaxies has some degree of gravitational relationship with its neighbours, so there's some relationship there pulling things together a bit, but there's dark energy pushing everything apart. So you've got both local gravity effects holding planets around stars and stars around galaxy black holes, and then you've got some organisation to the way those galaxies orbit and circle around the universe, but then the universe as a whole is getting bigger because dark energy is making more space between everything and moving everything farther apart. But it's a stupendously big entity, and we have no idea where the edge of it is and whether it's going to continue growing and going on forever, or whether it will stop growing one day and then begin to shrink again. And at the moment, we just don't know.
Question in about the status of sperm counts per ejaculation dropping by an estimated 60%. That's kind of freakish.
Sperm counts are dropping across the world, this is true, but not homogeneously. It's not the same for everyone everywhere. What we're seeing is that there is a decline in more developed countries, and in less developed countries, the decline is less marked. So in some countries, we're seeing more cases of male infertility owing to people dropping below the threshold for sperm count of what we would regard as infertility or subfertility. But in other countries, it's less marked, and it seems to be something to do with the degree of development of those countries. But what those factors are, we don't know. Is this because of lifestyles? Is this because of diets? Is this because of pollution? Is there some exposure to something in the environment? Is it chemicals that are hormonally active, for example? Is it things like oral contraceptive pills getting into drinking water and the estrogen effect is driving things? People do not know, and it's an area of active research at the moment, why we're seeing this decline in overall fertility in sperm counts in more developed countries.
Could that translate into couples needing some assistance if they want to start a family?
Well, it already is. And if you look at the rates of presentation of people with subfertility and infertility, it's not exclusively a male problem. It's not exclusively a female problem. It takes two to tango. But the proportion of infertility and subfertility cases attributable to males and falling sperm counts has gone up. And more people than ever before are needing help to start families. Now, to some extent, this is a reflection on age, because the age at which people are getting married, starting a family and so on is going up. Year on year, it's going up and up and up, and the average is now higher than it's ever been. As we get older, our fertility does decline. It declines both in men and women, but more markedly in women because of the fact that women have a menopause, which is when the ovary runs out of eggs. But something else is going on, because once you go beyond about the age of 35, the decline suddenly accelerates in women, but not in men. So we're seeing a combination of factors here. People starting families later, older people are less fertile than they were at a younger age, and we've got these added effects of an apparent decline beyond just what you would expect you to age in males in terms of their sperm quality and sperm count.
And maybe in closing, Stuart wants to know if you found any evidence of intelligent design in the universe.
Well, no. I mean, I'm not really sure where the term intelligent design came from. It sort of reared its ugly head about 20 years ago, where people were saying, well, things are so impressive and so complicated, there must be a designer, there must be a higher authority that made this happen. Well, actually, biology is very good at driving the evolution of things that are optimized for their environment, and that's how evolution works. Basically, you keep rolling the dice until you get the combination of factors and features that are a really good fit with the environment, because nature makes mistakes genetically called mutations. Some of those are bad, but sometimes they give you an advantage. And I had a really interesting conversation with a researcher called Andrea Manica at Cambridge University the other day, who is looking at human evolution. And he was looking at Africa specifically and saying, if we look at maps of Africa thousands to millions of years ago, you will find patches of Africa where there were no human activities going on. Those are the same areas where mosquitoes would have thrived, and therefore where malaria would have been really prevalent. But then about 10,000 years ago, all of a sudden humans begin to invade those patches of Africa, which are malaria hotspots. What changed 10,000 years ago? Well, humans developed sickle cell anemia. So this is a deleterious trait, but if you are just a carrier of that disease, you're less affected, but you're immune to malaria. So we've basically evolved a way round a problem posed by nature. We've optimized the way we work in some respects to combat a problem. And this is how nature works. Basically, you make a genetic mistake, and then you find sometimes it has a huge advantage, and the gene that causes that advantage gets concentrated in a population, and that animal changes its shape or form or function because it has an advantage and is a better fit with its environment in response to the selective pressure imposed by that environment. So you can get to where we've got without any intelligent design. You just need those principles of biology that Charles Darwin documented.
We're going to have to wrap it there. The Naked Scientist every Friday just after 9:30 right here on Cape Talk. It is 2 minutes to 10 o'clock.